Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're venturing into a really long and, well, often intense story.
Yeah,
The relationship between India and Pakistan.
that's right.
You've shared a compelling collection of material, from these broad overviews of decades of conflict right through to declassified U.S. intelligence reports.
Yeah, those give a fascinating perspective, sort of an outsider's lens, especially during the Cold War.
Exactly. So our goal today is to navigate the pivotal moments,
Yeah.
try to uncover the core drivers of this, enduring tension, and maybe even reveal some details that might shift how you, the listener, see this whole complex dynamic. So let's get started.
Absolutely. And what immediately jumps out, I think, is how the very beginning, the creation of both nations in
It's a
47.
partition.
Yeah, the partition of British India, it sort of inherently sowed the seeds for so much of what came later. It wasn't a clean break at all.
No, far from it.
The sheer scale of the violence, the displacement, I mean, the estimates vary wildly, don't they?
They do. Hundreds of thousands, maybe up to 2 million dead, and 14 million people displaced. It's hard to even grasp.
It really is, and that trauma, it runs deep. But crucially, the way the British handled the division, especially with the princely states.
Aye.
Like Jammu and Kashmir, you had a Muslim-majority population, but ruled by a Hindu Maharaja, Hari Singh.
Right. That specific situation in Kashmir, a population largely identifying as Muslim, ruled by a Hindu Maharaja, it feels, I don't know, almost like a recipe for future trouble, doesn't it?
It certainly set the stage. And Pakistan's early fear that Maharaja Hari Singh would choose to join India, well, that directly led to the first major war.
1947, 48, almost immediately.
Exactly. Tribal forces, apparently backed by the Pakistani army, moved into the region.
Right.
That pushed the Maharaja.
To ask India for help.
Yes, and to sign the Instrument of Accession. That's the key legal document formally joining India.
And then the UN gets involved quite quickly.
It does. The UN stepped in, brokered a ceasefire, and established the line of control, the Lassi.
So right from the start, Kashmir is divided. India gets about 2/3, Pakistan roughly 1/3, and it just stays that way, a major point of friction.
And that initial division really solidified. Fast forward about 18 years to 1965, Pakistan tries to stir things up again in Kashmir.
Operation Gibraltar, wasn't it?
That's the one, kind of a covert operation trying to infiltrate forces and spark an uprising against India.
But India didn't just react defensively.
No, India's response was a major escalation, a full-scale military attack across the international border into West Pakistan.
So the Second Kashmir War. Shorter, though, only 17 days.
Relatively short, yeah, but intense. Lots of big tank battles.
And the outcome.
Well, the Soviets and the U.S. helped broker a ceasefire, the Tashkent Declaration. But the general feeling is that India probably had the upper hand militarily when the fighting stopped.
Okay. Then comes 1971, and our sources really stress this one was different, not primarily about Kashmir,
Correct. The roots were totally different. It was all about the political crisis in East Pakistan.
which is now Bangladesh, of course.
Exactly. You had this political turmoil, then the Pakistani military crackdown, Operation Searchlight, reports of atrocities.
And a massive refugee crisis, right? Millions fleeing into India.
Huge. Around 10 million Bengalis seeking refuge in India. That was a massive catalyst for India deciding to intervene in the liberation movement.
So India gets involved, and Pakistan responds how?
Pakistan launched preemptive airstrikes on India's western border. But the war itself, it was incredibly decisive.
In what way?
Well, the Pakistani forces in East Pakistan surrendered quite quickly. Bangladesh was born as an independent nation, and the sheer number of Pakistani POWs,
Over 90,000, the sources say.
over 90,000 troops. Plus, Pakistan took significant hits to its Navy, Air Force, Army capabilities. It was a really stark contrast to the earlier wars.
Wow. And then there's the Simla Agreement in 72. India actually gave back the territory it captured in the West.
It did, as a goodwill gesture, officially. Now, historians debate the motives, Was it genuine peace building or maybe strategic, easing pressure, solidifying gains elsewhere? Looking at the politics back then in both countries probably gives some clues.
Interesting point. Okay, so after 71, we jump ahead quite a bit to 1999, Kargil.
Kargil War. Yeah, geographically smaller scale, maybe, but incredibly intense. High-altitude conflict.
This was Pakistani troops crossing the line of control again.
Yes, infiltrating and occupying strategic positions on the Indian side in the Kargil district.
And India's response.
A combination. Strong military offensive, Operation Vijay, but also a big diplomatic push.
And international pressure played a role here, too, especially the U.S.
Definitely. The U.S., under Clinton, put significant pressure on Pakistan to withdraw its forces, which they eventually did.
And it was seen as a major setback for Pakistan. I think Nawaz Sharif later mentioned very high casualty figures.
He did. Reportedly, over 4,000 Pakistani troops killed. It's generally considered a major military defeat for Pakistan, and it led to some international isolation and economic strain, too.
So those are the big four wars.
Yeah.
But the conflict wasn't just limited to those, was it? The sources list a whole lot of other engagement.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost constant, low-level friction punctuated by these bigger flare-ups. You've got the Siachen conflict, for instance.
Right, the glacier, the world's highest battlefield. That went on for years.
Yeah, from '84 really actively until the ceasefire in 2003. India launched Operation Meghdoot to take control, and Pakistan made several unsuccessful attempts to dislodge them. Brutal conditions up there.
And then there's these ongoing sort of proxy conflicts.
That's a key part of it. The insurgency in Jammu and Kashmir, which India firmly accuses Pakistan of backing. And then conversely, the insurgency in Balochistan, where Pakistan accuses India of supporting separatist groups.
And even looking wider, like in Afghanistan, they've historically backed opposing sides too.
Right. Deep mistrust, divergent strategic goals playing out across the region.
And just looking at the timeline, it's packed. Border clashes back in the 50s, Operation Brass Tacks in the 80s, that big Indian military exercise that really spooked Pakistan.
Yeah, that caused serious tension.
Then the big standoffs after major attacks, 2001 after the Indian Parliament attack, 2008 after the Mumbai attacks.
Both times bringing them very close to the brink, requiring significant diplomatic intervention.
And then all the border skirmishes, especially in the last decade or so, 2011, 2013, 2014, 2016, 2019.
The 2019 one was particularly serious, wasn't it, following the Pulwama attack?
Yes, the suicide bombing claimed by a Pakistan-based group led to Indian airstrikes inside Pakistan.
And then that aerial engagement where both sides claimed shoot-downs really showed how fast things can escalate.
Even with that 2021 joint statement recommitting to the ceasefire.
Which was welcomed, of course.
It seems underlying issues persist. There's even mention of an ongoing 2025 diplomatic crisis, so the tension hasn't really gone away.
Not fundamentally, no. And you also have these specific, sharp incidents like India shooting down that Pakistani Navy plane in '99 right after Kargil.
In the Ran of Kutch, yeah.
Yeah.
Caused a lot of anger.
And the conflicting stories around border shootings where soldiers are killed on both sides, it just highlights the deep lack of trust, the difficulty in even agreeing on basic facts.
Okay, so against this backdrop of constant tension and periodic war, then comes the nuclear dimension.
Which changes everything, doesn't it? India's first test in '74, Smiling Buddha, that was clearly the trigger for Pakistan's own program.
Bhutto's famous line, "Eat grass to get the bomb."
Shows the perceived existential need, right? Pakistan felt it had no choice. They did so-called cold tests in the '80s.
And then 1998, India conducts the Pokhran-2 tests.
And Pakistan responds almost immediately, check out the first, check out the second. Suddenly you have two nuclear-armed states neighbors with this incredibly volatile history.
Yeah. And their stated doctrines are different too. Pakistan talking about first use under certain conditions.
While India maintains a no first-use policy, that difference itself adds another layer of complexity, potential miscalculation in a crisis.
And those declassified U.S. intelligence documents you mentioned earlier, they really show how worried the outside world was, even back then.
Absolutely. The NIE's, the National Intelligence Estimates, a '89 State Department report calling the risk of conventional war going nuclear high due to miscalculation.
A 1993 NIE putting the odds of war at about 1 in 5, with nuclear rivalry being a key reason.
Yeah, and a recurring theme in those reports is how both sides consistently seem to underestimate where the other's red lines actually were. That's worrying.
Especially worrying is the stuff about potential attacks on nuclear facilities. That Livermore lab briefing from '81 about Kana TP, the Karachi plant.
Painting a really grim picture, potential for heavy casualties from radiation, even comparing it to Chernobyl scenarios. It shows what the stakes were.
Which makes that 1988 agreement between Rajiv Gandhi and Benazir Bhutto not to attack each other's nuclear facilities seem pretty significant. A vital confidence-building measure.
Definitely. A mutual recognition of just how catastrophic that would be. And more recent studies, the ones predicting nuclear winter, global famine from a regional nuclear war, are just terrifying.
It is truly sobering. And
Yeah.
you see the legacy of all this conflict reflected even in national holidays, right? Annual commemorations.
Yeah. Kargil Vijay Diwaz in India, Defense Day, and Yumi Takbir, the nuclear test day in Pakistan. These events are woven into the national story, reinforcing those narratives.
We should also touch on the role of other countries. It wasn't just India and Pakistan in isolation.
Not at all. The Cold War context was huge. The Soviet Union generally backing India, especially in 71.
And the U.S. often siding with Pakistan, though not always consistently, like pressuring them during Kargil.
Right. And China has been a pretty consistent diplomatic supporter of Pakistan.
Hmm.
More recently, you see Russia trying to play a role in de-escalation sometimes. These external relationships definitely shape the dynamic.
And finally, popular culture. Movies, TV shows in both countries, often depicting these wars.
Yeah, that's a powerful way these national narratives get reinforced, how perceptions of the other side are shaped and sometimes hardened. It reflects how deeply these conflicts impact society.
So if we try to sort of pull it all together, summarize this deep dive, what are the main takeaways?
Well, I think it's clear it's a long, incredibly complex, often violent history. It's fundamentally rooted in partition trauma and that unresolved Kashmir issue.
Right.
And while there have been attempts at peace, periods of détente, the deep-seated suspicion, these proxy conflicts, and crucially, the nuclear weapons, they create this persistently volatile environment.
And it's striking how those old U.S. intelligence warnings about miscalculation, about escalation, they still feel incredibly relevant today.
They really do. The risks haven't gone away.
Which leads us to that final, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener. Thinking about all these flashpoints, this history, and the absolutely catastrophic potential of nuclear conflict.
Yeah.
What are the most critical, maybe realistic steps both nations could take now? How do they break this cycle and actually foster lasting peace?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. The history we've dug into is dense, often troubling. But understanding its nuances, its twists and turns, feels essential for grasping where things stand now, and maybe, just maybe, imagining a more stable future for the region. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.